Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to TransafeWA's webinar this morning. I'm really pleased to be hosting this event and to have had such a great response to our efforts to bring you some industry specific information on a variety of topics. My name's Anna Stakowitz from TransafeWA. I've got John Elston sitting alongside me from Source, representing Guardian by Seeing Machines, and Naomi Higgs from MGM Bulk is joining us online also. So just quickly a little bit about TransafeWA. We're a non-profit road transport industry safety initiative. We have been operating since 2013 with a focus on events and projects in Western Australia. TransafeWA is committed to a safe, professional and sustainable road transport industry that protects its employees and the broader community. I will just ask anyone actually who's online who hasn't muted their microphones to do so, just to avoid any background noise for us today. Thank you. So TransafeWA, over our 7 years of operations, have delivered 23 road transport industry safety forums to thousands of industry participants throughout WA. These have provided a forum for the discussion of the industry's needs and risks, a conduit for industry participants to get directly to its regulators and key decision makers. And we have also developed and run campaigns to educate the general public to share the road safely with heavy vehicles, such as our Give a Truck campaign, and we're currently undertaking to deliver Instructor, which is a safety truck resource which will educate people on how to drive and be safe around trucks. That's a major project for our association at the moment, and these campaigns have developed out of feedback that we have had from our forums that much more needs to be done to educate the general public around sharing the road safely with heavy vehicles. So today, as I mentioned, we're joined by Naomi Higgs from MGM Bulk. MGM Bulk is a West Australian company with a workforce of over 300 employees and a core fleet of more than 80, somewhere more around the 115 mark, I believe, trucks and 250 trailer configurations. They provide service solutions for a number of WA customers across their bulk haulage, quarry and limestone businesses, and have supported TransafeWA as members since 2014. Source are the largest national distributor of the driver fatigue and distraction management system, Guardian by Seeing Machines. This technology is improving safety and performance across the transport industry, and Source have also been involved with TransafeWA as sponsors since 2018. A little bit about our speakers. So Naomi Higgs is the HSEQ HR manager for MGM Bulk. Her commitment to the transport industry is evident through the various roles she holds on committees and alliances in the road safety arena. Naomi has a diverse career within the mining, construction, engineering and bulk transport industries. John Elston is a business development manager for Source, specialising in Guardian by Seeing Machines. John has been associated with the trucking and transport industry for over 10 years, mostly through IVMS systems, but with a heavy focus on Guardian for the last 2 years. So in today's webinar, the discussion will explore the benefits gained by the MGM Group from adding Guardian by Seeing Machines to their road transport fleet. And at this point, I'm going to pass you over and stop screen sharing to John Elston, who will take us from Hina.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you can all hear me all right. Just a little bit, Connect Source are essentially an electrical engineering company solving a lot of challenges in the mining, transport and agricultural industry, where we develop products and wiring harnesses, etc., to from conception to everybody's good experience to get an optimal use of technology. What we're going to do first is just run through a little bit of what Seeing Machines does. So give you a bit of background on what Seeing Machine does and how it operates before we go into Naomi explaining how it's actually benefited to the MGM Group. So the first thing is basically explaining what Seeing Machines is. It's a safety device, ensuring that the drivers stay safe on the roads, monitoring primarily fatigue and distraction, and it is a safety device trying to ensure that the drivers get home safely to their families and thereby keeping everybody else safe on the roads as well. No driver would actually like to have a micro sleep and behind the wheel and traveling 100 kilometers down the road and cause a horrific accident. So that's what we are trying to prevent. Okay, now you got.
Sorry, hi. Hi, everyone. I was just going to work with John today and just ask him a few questions just to get more information for all of you out there about the machine. So I suppose, John, what does the system actually entail?
The system entails a driver-facing camera, which is an infrared, low-intensity IR camera, which operates in all lighting conditions and will look through things like sunglasses to monitor the driver's faces, etc. There's a forward-facing camera, which will then possibly exonerate anybody from what's happening on the road in front of them. There is a vibration motor which is fitted underneath the seat of the driver for in case when activation occurs. And there is a processor which is basically the brains of the device, which then encrypts the data and stores it for if necessary. So
how are all the objectives of the system achieved?
It basically manages driver fatigue and distraction. If the infrared camera once the driver's in his seat, it will draw up an algorithm of the driver's face, focusing on the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And then these thresholds are then set into the system in the processor. And if the driver's eyes are closed for a certain amount of time, or the head moves out of a certain rotation, not looking at the road, then an audible alert or vibration will trigger. And depending on the configuration from the company, this event is classified and pushed back to the company.
You just mentioned that there was like configurations from the company, but are there like default parameters that are set up within the system?
There are default parameters based on about 5 billion kilometers of travel done being monitored by Seeing Machines. The default parameter is eye closure for more than 1.5 seconds at above 10 kilometers an hour, and for distraction, not looking ahead for more than 4 seconds above 40 kilometers an hour. Those are the defaults which have been worldwide proved to be the most effective.
And you said about the companies configuring, so these aren't fixed parameters?
No, they're not fixed parameters. It all depends on the companies. When the devices are installed in the vehicle, our support department actually discusses the uses with the companies and decide what is actually the best for that company. We do have a couple of companies who move, for example, the distraction out from 4 seconds slightly longer because they need to look at their load constraints for a longer period or something. So no, those are individually defined by an agreement with the support department.
Cool. So when the device has an event, how are the events monitored?
If for example, it's a fatigue event or the driver closed their eyes for more than 1.5 seconds, that data is captured and is pushed through to a control center, where there are 2 control centers. There's one in Tucson in America and one in Canberra. That footage is then actually viewed by a human and is then classified either as fatigue, might be distraction, might actually even be classified as normal driving, and normal driving will go no further.
And when it does detect fatigue, what's the next step?
If there is fatigue detected, the fatigue can be different levels of fatigue. You can get a micro sleep, where there is a definite eye closure. Often the neck muscles relax and the head will drop. So that would actually be classified as a micro sleep, which is probably the worst one you can have. It just fatigue is a general sort of slow eye closure or a rapid eye closure. But the control center will actually look at those and verify them as to what they determine from the footage they see, as to what if it's a fatigue event. And as I say, if it's a fatigue event, a phone call will go through to a predetermined list as agreed by the company and our support department. And on that list, it'll go down. The first person on the list will get a phone call. If they're not available, go to the second person, etc. down the line until somebody can actually be contacted. An email will also go out to all those people on the list who've actually been asked to accept an email. And that email will show the time that it happened, the total length of eye closure, the distance traveled with eye closed, what speed the vehicle was going at, etc. And a map reference point as well as to where it actually happened.
And so it measures fatigue, and it also, it determines fatigue and also distractions. What does it actually, how does it determine a distraction? What is the distraction determination?
Distraction, as I say, if the head is out of a certain rotation for more than 4 seconds above 40 kilometers an hour, it will trigger an audible alert, not a vibration, unless the camera cannot see the driver's eyes because the head is turned to that extent. If it's just an audible alert, that will also get verified by the control center. And if there's mobile phone can be seen in the footage, it'll actually come back as mobile phone use. Otherwise, if they're looking in their lunchbox or looking at a map or something for longer than 4 seconds, that will purely go out in a report, or if requested, it can be sent as an email, but there won't be a phone call for distraction. But an email can go out for either mobile phone use or distraction, depending on what the company wants.
And so getting back to the fatigue then, can the drivers manage their own fatigue?
Not at all. It's actually a myth. There's a very good book by a professor from America who says that fatigue, we cannot manage our own fatigue. It's a myth. And people cannot catch up on sleep. We can't say, right, I had a long day yesterday, I'm going to catch up on some sleep. Sleep cannot be caught up on. So, no, we cannot maintain and manage our own fatigue. It doesn't happen.
And I suppose then it begs to ask the question, if we've got this technology in the trucks, is that going to replace the needs for parking areas and stopping areas and things like that?
No, definitely not. If a fatigue event was to occur, that driver needs to pull up at the nearest possible rest point. What will probably happen is that the technology will actually be used to determine where more rest points actually need to be had and place more than less rest points on the road.
And I mean, these are really well designed, and obviously there's a lot of big companies that use them, but are they mainly used in line haul vehicles?
No, you'll find that it's used a lot in line haul vehicles, but line haul vehicles, fatigue happens in the first, probably in the first 30 to 90 minutes of a journey. And we've actually had one of our own members of staff after 28 minutes having a fatigue event. It has been recorded up as low as 11 minutes after the start of a journey. So no, definitely not. It can be any vehicle. Fatigue seems to peak at about between 3 and 5 in the morning, slightly, but otherwise it's fairly even across a curve the whole day. Fatigue occurs virtually 24 hours of the day.
And you're mentioning before about how it picks up the fatigue, and it records a little bit of a video snippet, doesn't it? What's the importance of having that video?
The importance of the video is most people won't believe that they've actually had a fatigue event until they actually view the footage. So the fatigue event, that footage is captured in the system, which then can be viewed through a secure portal with obviously limited access to those who've got authority to look at it. And they can actually then, if necessary, call the driver and have a look and say, look, you've had a fatigue event. If they say, no, I haven't, it's a game changer when they actually see that video and don't realize that they've actually had a fatigue event. You'll find that most long-haul drivers will admit that they've actually had a fatigue event and had a micro-sleep during the journey.
And, you know, the systems that we run, obviously, there's some mobile phone coverage that allows the uploading of information. But what happens when a vehicle is actually outside of mobile phone coverage when there's an event?
The driver will still get that alert in the vehicle at the time of the incident. So either vibration or audible or both. But if the vehicle is outside of mobile phone range, that data cannot get pushed through until the vehicle regains coverage. As soon as it regains coverage, that footage will be viewed and the phone call, etc., would go out. Unless the vehicle has been out of coverage for more than 12 hours, because then it's determined that that should be in a new shift. So that driver would not be driving. But the policies the company's put in place say, right, you know, if the vibration motor goes off, you need to stop the vehicle, get out, kick the tires, have a drink of water, whatever. It's up to companies to determine their individual policies.
And sort of, I mean, this is pretty amazing technology and we're big fans, but where does it come from? Where does the technology actually come from?
Technology is actually developed in Canberra. So it's an Australian product. And they are specialized in algorithms with looking at vision, etc. And the technology is now being used in aircraft simulators. It's being used in ferries, in buses, in trains, all sorts of things where, you know, some of the biggest customers that are using the technology now, the likes of Caterpillar, the London Bus Company, Emirates. So a lot of very big companies are actually taking on the technology and running with it.
With safety being such an integral part of transport industry and drivers' behaviours on the roads and things determining their safety focus, do you know if there have been incidents where drivers have actually been dismissed due to any fatigue events?
Not to my knowledge, but we have had some incidents where drivers have been picked up to have a sleep apnea or a sleep disorder, who've actually been pulled off the road by the company and actually gone through a series of medical things to get them back on the road again. But no, to my knowledge, nobody's actually been dismissed for having a fatigue event.
Mm-hmm. Now, MGM have a few different branches, and I know you've got a nice little setup that we can work with that. Can you explain to us how that sort of works when you run different fleets of vehicles within your business? Yeah,
within a business, you can have as many different fleets as you like, and with different levels of access to each one of those fleets. So you can have different divisions within your business, having viewing only certain vehicles in the fleet. So it all depends. You can have an overarching admin looking at them all, and you can have it split up in fleets. So if you've got vehicles in the Pilbara and you've got things in the southwest, they can actually split the whole fleet as how they like, and they can move the vehicles from one to the other.
Mm-hmm. So there's a whole range of benefits, obviously, you've spoken about, but apart from those obvious benefits in looking after the drivers, are there any other benefits that you get from installing these devices?
NTI Insurance, who are the biggest insurance involved in the trucking industry, have actually come to the party with this, where they are looking to review people's subscriptions, and we actually have people with a reduction of up to 30%. They look at reduction of the excess up to $2,500. They remove certain driver restrictions, so in this time of driver shortages, you can get younger drivers, etc., in behind the wheel. They'll play market value plus up to the settlement can be 20% above them, up to the maximum sum insured. And NTI realised that having these devices in the vehicle is actually going to lower the accident rate. So that's why one of the reasons why they've come to the party. But the data that they gather is purely used for statistics. They cannot use the data against a particular company. They don't get access to that. They just get access to the statistics.
No, that's really great. So do you have any statistics then on the cost of an accident to the transport company?
We have got some statistics that actually came out in the last week or so, which was actually quite scary. And there was a report done by a company, a group called Wrapup, and they're saying that you got your physical costs, such as your cargo damage, your vehicle damage, your injury costs, your loss of revenue, your insurance costs, your towing costs, the storage of damaged vehicles, etc. But then you've got your hidden or indirect costs, which include your loss of customers, loss of sales, your salaries to injured employees, cost to hire a replacement vehicle, poor public relations, increased public relation costs and government agency costs. But apart from that, your social media can have a very big detrimental effect on a company if there's an accident or an incident involving a vehicle.
I think we've all seen that from time to time with some of the posts. So how much revenue is lost on average?
There was a business report stated that the average cost of a vehicle accident is about $148,000. And that came from research done across Australia. And what they're saying that a lot of companies, if you're operating on a margin of about 2%, to recover that cost, you're going to need to have a turnover of about $7.5 million just to recoup that cost of that incident. And if there was a fatality, it would be a lot higher. So the cost of an accident can directly affect the company's bottom line and very badly influence it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
My pleasure. But now then, now people sort of possibly got a bit of a better idea of the product. Let's sort of rather go back to yourself and ask how things are happening with MGM, and we'll just see, how have your drivers accepted the having the DSSI units in your road trains, etc.
Well, look, to be honest, at first there was a little apprehension from some of them. And I think some of them thought there was like this big brother setup, watching them while they're driving. But as you said earlier, you can't tap into the camera to actually watch the driver live. Once they realised that we couldn't watch them and that they were installed purely for their own safety, that's when they really grew to appreciate them. So it also sort of strengthened, after they experienced how effective they were at alarming for the fatigue events.
And what do you mean by appreciate them?
It's funny because even though they saw they were apprehensive, as I mentioned, they did soon see the value of having them in the trucks. And that was because that I think not a lot of them realised they were having those fatigue events. And now we have most drivers of our fleet will not leave the depot without having them installed and having them working correctly, because they've all experienced firsthand how beneficial they really are at detecting fatigue, and also how they're contributing to supporting the driver staying awake and alert while they're operating our road trains.
Do you think, has the system actually reduced fatigue in your drivers?
I wouldn't say it's actually reduced fatigue, but it's definitely allowed the drivers to become more aware of their own fatigue, and also allowing that awareness to help them better manage their fatigue strategies better. So this then reduces the events further on that they're having. In fact, when we first had them installed, we had numerous fatigue events, and it was pretty scary really to think of how many close calls were happening that no one really knew anything about. So once we showed the drivers the footage recorded in the web-based program, they were able to actually recognise their early signs. And once they recognised their early signs, they were then better able to manage their fatigue on a personal level. So they also had the knowledge of their actions leading up to an event, and they get to see their own personal behaviours. So I suppose for me, as an example, I know when I'm getting tired because I tend to sit back in my chair and I tend to do like that in the car. And so as soon as I do that, I then realise that I've got to actually do something about stopping, having a break, especially if I've been driving for a long time. So by giving them that knowledge as well, that strategy then allowed them to recognise their own signs. They could pull over, have a break, and that was happening before they actually got to the point where they were having an event. You know, some were actually shocked, really. And like you mentioned before, they don't even realise they're having an event. So they were shocked to see themselves and realise that they'd actually closed their eyes while they were driving.
And how does MGM actually manage the fatigue if there's a fatigue event?
Well, like you mentioned earlier, John, the supervisor receives a phone call from the call centre and the operations centre after that event's been classified as a true fatigue event. And at that point, our supervisors reach out to the drivers and check it just to make sure they're okay. We have a formal procedure in place on how we manage the events, and that starts off with the first event being a check-in by the supervisor. If there's a second event in a single shift, then the supervisor contacts the driver and the driver takes a mandatory 20-minute break at the next rest stop to make sure that they can have that break and do a little bit of fatigue management strategy, whether that's a sleep or a kick the tyres or something to get them back on track. And this happens regardless of how they're feeling at the time. Because sometimes as well, and I know we've all done it, we've been driving, we think, no, we're okay. And then we have those signs. So you just never really know. Yeah. And then we make sure obviously they're recharged before they return to the wheel. And in rare cases where there is actually a third event, then we get them to pull over and we swap them out with an alternative driver. So it's not really that common for us to have the 3 events in one shift. You know, in fact, with the size of our fleet and the number of drivers we have, we've only had 3 occasions of this happening this year. And I'm sure other companies as well have different stats for their events. But, you know, each company can manage their events in a way that suits their business. So there's no wrong or right way, but we find that that's an effective strategy for MGM.
What are you using? Are you using it for distraction and mobile phone, possible mobile phone use as well? Yeah.
Look, we use, we'll use any tools that come at us. So, yeah, we definitely get in there and have a look at that. And early on when they were first installed, again, we had quite a few distraction events. Our drivers are out on the open road. So it's pretty easy to take your eyes off the road and start looking around when you're driving. But as the drivers become more familiar with the system, they then begin to train themselves to look ahead at the road in more regular intervals. That one stops the machine from setting off, and also that brings their attention back to what they're doing. So it's been a great tool in helping the drivers to always maintain their focus on the road ahead. We also do use the cell phone events that are detected by the machines, and we also use some of these detections to detect some of the bad habits that people are using, so like mobile phones and, you know, if there's a seatbelt issue and those sort of things. Although there aren't that many, it has actually allowed MGM to ensure our drivers are operating their trucks in a safe manner when they're out on the road, and it also establishes better habits that they can hopefully take back into their own personal light vehicles. And so hopefully then we're protecting them and their families even outside the workplace.
And am I correct in saying that MGM has now installed this system in all your vehicles?
Yeah, we did. We started off by installing them in our Northwest fleet, primarily due to the remote nature of the work and the rolling shift structure. So we saw a higher risk of fatigue up there, and that's why we did it. But it didn't take us long to see that they were adding a lot of value to the business, and the directors then had them installed across our whole fleet. So even our trucks that do the short runs in the Southwest, we still have them installed there. And now every truck we have on the road has a unit fitted, and any new trucks entering the fleet, as you know, are fitted with a unit prior to their first trip out on the road.
And what about your light vehicles? Are you doing anything with the light vehicles?
Yeah, so again, due to the remote nature of the work in the Northwest, we've also had them installed in all of our light vehicles and all of our service vehicles. So any light vehicle that goes in excess of 30 kilometres from Port Hedland, if they're travelling to a client site or attending breakdowns and things like that, they must have a unit installed. And also it's essential to check those units and the unit operations as part of our pre-start on our journey management plan. So if there's no unit in the vehicle or if it's not working correctly, then the vehicle's not permitted to actually do that journey. And the team have to seek an alternative vehicle before they go out. Now, we don't really have many events from the light vehicles, but in our opinion, if it prevents just one incident, then obviously it's worth having in the light vehicles up there as well.
Okay, so sort of summarising, what would be the sort of benefits that you're really seeing through having the guardian devices through your fleet?
I think ultimately they give the business and the drivers the confidence that any fatigue issues that they're having are detected early and are able to be addressed before an actual incident occurs. Our team's made up of professional drivers, like most of the companies out there, and they do take a lot of pride in what they do. So the last thing they want to do is be responsible for any major incidents or, in a worst case scenario, injuries to themselves or other road users. We also have had some people that we've actually have picked up some medical issues with them. There was just one that I was speaking with one of our team today who's just come back, had quite a few events, and so we sent them for a medical, and we found out that they need to have some treatment done to try and help them with some other stuff that then was affecting their fatigue. So it's been helpful there too. We've also been able to use as distraction events and cell phone events that have come up to target some education to some particular drivers to help them change some behaviours and maybe some bad habits, which contributes to reducing the risk of incidents occurring on the road. And, ultimately it gives the business peace of mind that our team are acting professionally and they're not carrying out behaviours that put other road users at risk. And, that kind of reassurance is priceless, really.
I think that's fantastic. Appreciate your input.
Thank you.
We're going to open up the opportunity for anyone to ask questions now. So to do so via our modest Zoom system, you can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it in via the chat function that you find on your bottom panel, or wherever you've got it positioned on your screen. There is one question already there from Kieran Sutton, who's with Linfox, and Kieran asks, John, are there any glasses, normal or sunglasses, the system doesn't work with?
The answer is yes, there are. They're very limited. We can actually give you a list of them as well, but they are very limited. I mean, I have prescription polarized lenses, etc., and it looks straight through and looks like I'm wearing a pair of frames. So there are very, very few, and I haven't come across a pair of safety glasses yet that actually won't look through.
Okay, thanks, John. Has anyone else got any questions for either Naomi or John?
Gary Munns from Clean Heat. Firstly, Anna, John, Naomi, thanks for the production. Really interesting so far. A couple of questions. We've recently introduced the system, so I guess probably some questions to you, Naomi, on your experience. I think we'll talk later. We did miss 15 minutes, I must admit. About 5 minutes after it started, we dropped out, but we did get back in, so apologies if some of this might have been covered. But the distraction awareness of this, I think, is equal to the fatigue side. We always talk about the fatigue with it, but even though there was some discussion about distraction, I think that's hugely valuable as well. We interested in Naomi's experience with drivers and their seating, or the way their seating arrangements in the truck, the way they position themselves, the driving. We had an example, with the driver, the way he drove generated report after report after report, and we had to make some adjustments. Is that something you've come across, Naomi?
Yeah, look, it has, especially if someone's got, even some physical conditions going on with their eyes, and the system doesn't always pick that up. But like you said, we've just worked with that and worked with the units. I suppose a couple of our examples would be, we had a guy that was quite short, and so where he was positioned in the truck didn't line up with the camera, so it just continuously went off saying, out of vision, out of vision. And we also are just careful about trying to get people of the same sort of size and height in the truck, or we have to get people to adjust it when they swap over drivers. But yeah, so yes, it has happened, but like you said, we just make those small adjustments, and it's just part of that refining process over time when you first introduce it into the fleet. Yeah,
and that sounds exactly like our example. The other one was the truck doesn't send an alert if it's going over 10 k's an hour. We're finding that we're getting some alerts when it's stationary, and I believe, and John, you can chip in here, but I believe it's about losing satellite connection. Do you have those occur in your systems where the truck might be parked in a workshop, understandably connection issue, but also we have them come through in open areas? Do you have any of that there where the driver's sitting there, he might be eating a sandwich, and there'll be an alert come through?
Look, we have. I think it's very, very rare that it does happen, but it has. I'm not sure of the tech specs on that though. Maybe John could probably give us a bit more information on that.
Look, the satellites, the GPS antenna sometimes does drop out in the satellites, and then it actually the defaults drop to 0. If it's not picking up a satellite, all the parameters drop to 0. So that 1.5 seconds above 10 kilometers an hour just drops to 1.5 kilometers. Drops to 1.5 seconds. If the distraction as well, that will drop to 0. So you would get the alert in the vehicle going off, but that will get pushed through to the control center, and it should actually then be classified as normal driving. So it might give the driver a bit of an alert in the vehicle, but it's not going to come back. It's not going to come up in any report about the driver having fatigue events or anything, because it will get reclassified by the control center.
Yeah, no, and look, then it does give the driver a start, and that's the explanation we had received. So thanks for that, John. But I was just interested in the experience with Naomi. But so we haven't had it in long. It's in one part of the fleet, but yeah, support fully everything that's been said about the system. It took a minute. People don't believe they're having a problem until they see the footage. So yeah, I think it's a good system. So thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary. There's a couple more questions coming through the chat. Naomi, how do you deal with the maintenance and technology failures of the units? I'm sure there's none, John. Is that?
No, they're perfect. No. Look, being in Port Hedland kind of isn't remote, but it is. If anyone's operated out of there, you do know that there are issues with distance and parts and things like that. So what MGM did is we actually partnered up and got our auto electricians some training. So we actually trained up our own maintenance staff so that they can actually work on the units. And then, if there is something that, with anything mechanical, there's something that does have a wear and tear, then we just stock a few of those products so that we can swap them out as quickly as possible.
And Naomi, how does MGM manage the email traffic for the distraction alerts, given the number of vehicles you have? I would assume there is a fair bit of admin burden that's coming from another local fleet.
Actually, we in the Northwest, our amazing HASEC representative up there, they actually go through every day in the morning all of the distraction events that come through DSSI or through the seeing eye machines, and the cell phone events and also the covered sensors. So they actually look at those for the whole fleet in the morning, and you'll find when you first bring it in, yeah, it's a huge job. But as people get to use the system more, they actually have less because their behaviours change. So although you probably could say it's a big job, and I mean, I see Cheryl there and I can't really ask her, but I probably wouldn't think it'd be more than, for our size of our fleet, probably half an hour in the morning, and that's all the events for the last 24-hour period. So it's not quite as big as you think.
Okay, another question, thanks Naomi, is what is the longest eye closure setting you have heard of that triggers a fatigue event? Is everyone using the system using 1.5 seconds? John?
To my knowledge, everybody's using 1.5 seconds. I don't have any of my customers operating from what we've done above 1.5 seconds. Sometimes the distraction, they've moved out, but not eye closure. Because what happens with that, if one wanted to alter the eye closure or distraction timing of the event, it would be effective over that entire fleet. You can't just do it for one vehicle. It would actually be across the whole board.
Okay, is there anyone else online who would like to ask a question before we go to a couple more that are there on the chat?
If I could just add to that one a little, we, not the eye closure, but we did adjust the settings for the distraction events because obviously when we're tipping off at the port, and while we're tipping off, we're doing a little bit more than 10 kilometres, but they're having to be so aware and looking around at so many different things. So we just upped the kilometres in that space so that the events weren't going off. So yeah, I think the customisable aspect's really handy because you can actually tailor it to your own business needs.
Okay, so there's one more question here. Is there any medical concerns that the devices may emit anything that may have any effects on the driver short or long term? Have any studies been done?
Yes, there have studies been done. If anybody would like to email me, and I can send you some reports that were done in both in Japan and in America and here with the intensity of the infrared, which was the concern, and it is lower than the intensity of the device to change your TV channel. It's about 100 times lower than the minimal permissible amount. It's very, very low indeed. So there is no effect from the infrared whatsoever.
Thanks, John. There's one more question here from Jeff Rosser. There is a fleet in South Australia that has reduced the fatigue event time to 1 second with no noticeable increase in events. I'm not sure the rest of the questions come through there. Is that something that's familiar to you?
I think that's just a statement it is made.
Oh, okay.
1 second.
Okay, yeah, okay.
The other thing, sorry, what I should have mentioned earlier on is the driver-facing camera actually has a button on it as well, which will do a manual recording. The default is normally set to 15 seconds before and 15 seconds after. So if an incident happens, the driver has the option to push that button, and it'll actually record from 15 seconds before you push the button to 15 seconds after. But that is also expandable as well, depending, but it just uses up more data. It allows footage of anything to get pushed through to the office if the driver of the vehicle feels something is untoward happened, somebody's cut them off or a car's run across the road, whatever, they can actually push that button, which will give them additional footage. The setting of 0 kilometres an hour when there's no connection, we can have a chat to our support department. We wouldn't recommend any change to that. Because it doesn't happen that often, quite honestly, and it's just going to trigger in the vehicle, which the driver will then, of his own volition, realise, look, he wasn't doing anything wrong, he was parked up, he was doing his paperwork. We also sometimes have where the driver is parked somewhere, he's left the ignition on, he's climbed into the passenger seat to do his paperwork, and all of a sudden the device says, oh, I can't see in a driver in here, but he's parked close to a building or something where there's a bit of satellite bounce, and the device thinks it's doing over 15 kilometres an hour or something, so all of a sudden says, oh, I'm moving, but I've got nobody in the seat. So those sort of things, you would get a few anomalies like that coming in as well, but they are the exception to the rule.
And I suppose from a haulier perspective, I'd rather it be doing it that way than the other way. I'd rather be getting a few extra little, anomalies, and yes, they're unfortunate and probably uncomfortable, than thinking that it's not reporting things. So I think that's maybe a sensitivity thing that's a benefit.
Yeah.
Thanks, Naomi. John, is there anyone else online with any questions before we wrap up? Great. Sounds like we've answered most things for everybody there, and hope it's been a really informative session for you all. TransAct will follow up today with information for you so that you can contact Naomi or John if there's any questions you think of that you'd like to ask following today. And we'll also make a recording of today's session available, so if you would like to share it with colleagues and contacts, you're able to do that. Thanks to Naomi and John for that. So yeah, back to TransAfe and this little webinar series that we're doing. We will be offering our next webinar next month with Dr. Nick Mabbott, who's actually joined us online today as well too. So Nick is an organisational psychologist who has spoken at a number of our forums, and everybody loves Nick's sessions. They always want more and walk away with a much greater understanding of their own sleep patterns and things to think about when they're not sleeping well. And so in the session that we're going to run with Nick, he's going to combine his scientific understanding of people and lifestyle and sleep with some very practical lessons that he has devised for improving sleep hygiene. So with today's wrap up, I'll email everyone details of how they can register for that session with us as well too and join. And any other questions with regard to TransSafe or hopping onto our mailing lists, you can reach out to myself and the contact details there, or my colleague Lara, who is working with me on our projects, which are, again, as I mentioned, our Give a Truck campaign, and our Instructor, which is a safety truck project that we will be delivering to the state next year to travel around teaching people to share the road safely with heavy vehicles. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Oh yes, and I will mention, that's right, that John and I, our next gig is the Mac Muster, which is an event that's happening in the
End of November.
And yeah, at the end of November. You can find out more information about that. This is essentially a little truck show that's happening here. It's not just for those that have Mack trucks in their fleets, but there'll be all sorts of trucks on display. But a really nice way for the industry and community to get together at the end of the year after a reasonably tumultuous one for everybody. And all the funds from that event too will support cancer research in Western Australia. It's being organised by
the WA Limestone, Stephen de la Bonner, and Jason Clackworthy from CDS Low Loaders.
Yeah, so again, two great West Australian operators. So yes, if you've got, it's Sunday,
29th, I think it is.
Yeah, 29th of November. So a nice day out for the family if you're interested in that one. And Connect Source will be there with
the Seeing Machines devices. We do also have some entry tickets if anybody's interested to contact us. Otherwise, it's an entry of $10 per adult, and kids are free. And there are food trucks going to be there as well.
Excellent. So we might see you there. If not, thanks again for joining us today, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Appreciate your support.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye for now.